All right, well, welcome to session 6. It is Thursday, August 25th, just a couple of minutes after 6 p.m. Central Time. So tonight we are going to cover higher order functions. There isn't a whole lot of talking. Both Monday and Wednesday we had guests, and that kind of pushed us getting into the challenges a little bit later each evening. Hopefully, we should be able to knock out at least 3 challenges tonight, possibly 4, just depending on how things progress. Uh, with higher order functions, I am going to do some examples in the replit. And so let's get started. So higher order functions, functions that operate on other functions, either by taking them as arguments or by returning them, are called higher order functions, right? So if we take a look at this function add is just a normal function, right? So we take in 2 parameters, num1, num2, we add them together, we return the answer, right? Multiply is also a function, so num1, num2, and then we basically take those 2 parameters, we multiply them together, we return the answer. Now, arithmetic is a higher order function. And the reason it's a higher order function is because it takes another function in as a parameter. So now we're taking num1, num2, and calc. And then we're going to let the answer be calc num1 or num2. And so for us, with these examples, calc could either be num1, num2, and add, or num1, num2, and multiply. And that allows us to change out the math that we're actually doing inside of this higher order function. Right, so here's an example. We take arithmetic and say 2, 3 add. So num1, num2 calc turns into 2, 3 and add, and then let answer is add 2 and 3, and then basically we would return the answer of 5, right? So add num1, num2. Oops, sorry. Yep. And so the reason that we do this is to reduce the complexity of each function, as well as to help keep everything organized. So there is a more advanced concept in coding called the principle of least responsibility. And what that says is, or I'm sorry, not least responsibility, single responsibility. And what that says is that each unit of code should have a single responsibility. So each function should do as close to one thing as possible, right? So you don't want a function that does addition and multiplication and division and subtraction all in the same function. You would want a separate function for each one of those, and then a fifth function that helps you decide which function to use. And it's also scalable, right? So right now we deal with functions, and I talked in one of the earlier classes about classes and modules, and basically the way that we can group our functions together. And it's the same thing as we go up the chain. So if you have a class, let's say we have a class called dog, uh, all of the functions that are inside class dog should have something directly to do that allow dog to accomplish something as a class. Like, you don't want random functions in there that have nothing to do with being a dog. So like we could have a function that says bark, or a function that says eat or walk or run or wag tail, right? But we wouldn't have any function inside the dog class that says start engine, right? Because that would probably, we would want that in our class that is for an automobile. All right, so that is pretty much it for the slides. So let's go ahead and get into the replit here and start looking at a basically all what a higher order function is. And at the end of the day, higher order, let's do this. All right, and so I think that was like either by taking them as arguments or by returning them. Okay, and so we're good there. So we could do something. We'll just take we'll build on the example that they were using in the slide, right? So I can say all right, and I hope I would get 15.
Hold on 1 second. So when you write the const add, is add just acting as a variable at this point, or is it telling the function what it wants to, what you want it to do?
So this is what makes it a function. This is the same thing as writing this.
All right. So in line 10, so the add is just a variable.
It's
It's the function name, right?
right. You're declaring a function, right? And so this is the name of the function, and it's being stored in memory, right? And we're using the const syntax here, but it doesn't make it a variable. It's still this is a function.
Okay. All right.
Right. This is just the ECMA 16 or the ES6 syntax, right? But this is the same thing as this. Okay, and so when I run this, I get 15. All right, and I can do the same thing here. I can say const. Oops. All right, and I get my 100 here. And same thing, so I could
Yeah.
right? So these are all different functions that I have available. And now instead of doing each one of these separately, I can say something like const. Right? And so I can get rid of this. And so if I do calculator add, I think I called it add. Yep. All right, so there's my 15. If I change this to subtract, I would get -5. All right, there's my -5. Multiply 5 times 10. All right, a half. And there's my remainder of 1. So 10 goes in 3 times with 1 left over. Now, same thing here. And this is, again, it's just passing through what's happening. And we want to keep it separated so that not all of this is loaded into one place and you have to keep all of it there. And it's also, and again, like this is a very simplistic pattern, but let's say that each one of these 5 functions did something more complicated where you would have 40 or 50 lines of code in each one of these functions. And then what we would talk about is like we would start having like an add.js, right? And so add would actually be over here. Oh, I just added a folder instead of a file. Right, and so add actually gets moved from here over to here, and then we would put in an export statement here, and we'd import it over here. And this won't work, like this isn't the appropriate syntax. And so then there would just be different import statements, and then you would never actually see what add looks like unless you come over here. And again, where each one of these is 1 line of code, it's not necessarily a big deal, but like we try and keep classes at work as small as possible. But I mean, most of them are going to be anywhere from like 50 to 150 lines long. If something goes over 500 lines, we start taking serious looks at that. How can we break this up and split it apart into separate files? Because it's easier to have two small files pulled up side by side with each other, right? So I can have index and add pulled up side by side rather than having 500 lines of code that you have to keep scrolling up and down through. And it just makes it easier to get confused. And so this is, and again, like this is outside of kind of a little bit outside of the scope of the class right now, but this is why, like, it may look weird when I do this, but this is why we start talking about these principles and getting people that are just learning to code to start to think in this manner. This, that back, this, right? And that's where we start talking about going from functional programming to object-oriented programming, which is what the goal of Code Platoon is to move you past just solving algorithms and one file problems and move you into what is called the object-oriented programming paradigm, where you'll start thinking in functions and methods and classes and modules and how to start organizing larger projects. All right, so any questions about higher order functions or anything that I showed here? Okay. So
Alright.
let's
go ahead. I had one question about where you had like made the additional page. So is that pretty much like, you know, in HTML, CSS, where you have like a separate CSS file, and then you link to it on the HTML page so that it knows where to look for the file?
Sort of. It's, I mean, that is the basic concept, but for instance, like by the time you leave Code Platoon, you'll be using frameworks. So like Django for Python on the back end, React JS for JavaScript on the front end. And what we have, so let's see here. So we'll just look at, I'll just pull up a Rails project here. So this is Ruby. So don't worry about any of the syntax or anything like that. Right. So this is a like a Rails blog project that I built from a tutorial. Right. And so like what we see in Replit right here, right? So my files, I've got an index.js and then a package.json and package lock.json, which are where I use to store my dependencies. And dependencies are pre-written packages of code that I can use, that I can import into my project. So, and you can see like, I don't really have anything here. I just have Node. And, but so like a real project, right? So like, and this is fairly small scale, right? Like these are all of the folders that I have pretty much out of the box, like as soon as I start using a framework, right? So I've got my application, I've got controllers, right? So like an application controller, article, categories, pages, sessions, users, because I have this set up so that you can log in and log out. And this doesn't look like JavaScript, but this does look a lot like Python, which is something that eventually you'd start learning. And and it holds like the small front end JavaScript package on here, so that like it renders a home page. But like this is a fully functional application with a database, like a built out. So like, I mean, here's the map of my database that this uses. And so you can see now when we start talking about something this large, and that I've got an application controller in here that needs to be utilized over here, right? So I need to come into controllers, looking for model there. So there's my models, right? And so something in my model is going to be utilizing something out of my controller, right? And so I can't see, just by looking at this, I can't see what's going on in the other part of the application, right? So again, like this is VS Code, like this is a full-fledged IDE, right? And so I'll start pulling up different windows to different places so that I can look at them at the same time, cut across. But you can see like, and like I said, this is very simple. This just allows me to create users and create blogs and then comment on blog posts, right? And all of this is required to make that happen, right? And I can run a local server. So I haven't fired it up in a while. So that'll take a minute. I'll come back here and I'll turn it on. You can see what it kind of looks like when I turn it on. But this, what this is right here is something that you would be close to being able to do leaving Code Platoon. Some of the stuff around the user authentication is probably a step past what you'd be able to do with Code Platoon, but you will build a project very similar to this in Python, using the Django framework in Code Platoon, right? And this is again like a full stack application. There's other like what they call like a two repo application, where this is just the back end. So you'd see something like this, And then there's something very similar to this that runs the front end portion of the website, like the stuff that you actually see in the web browser. And it will be just as big as this. It probably, I think React is a little bit bigger by the time it gets done installing everything. And then you keep two separate parts, the code separate, but they still have to be able to talk to each other, right? So like if you have and basically in your database, if you have a blog post and a user and a comment for that, then you have to access that the right way through the front end. And so you will be writing things about your back end on your front end so that they can talk to each other and send the information back and forth. The same thing, like your front end should be able to create a form that allows you to create new users, creates new blog posts, creates new comments, and then sends all of that in an expected format to the back end so that your back end can then save it to your database and then display it again later when you recall the information, right? So why we start talking about that stuff here with something like that is because from week 1, where you're doing things that look like this in Code Platoon, to hitting week 13 and 14, you're presenting projects to an audience that look like this. All right, well, all that stuff runs in the background. And Chad, did that help with the question?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Okay, and any other questions before we start to get into the challenges? Okay, so let's take a look at camel case. All right, so, and let me do this as well. I like this format, so we can keep doing this. All right, so let's read this here. There are a couple of variable naming conventions in programming. They are camel case and snake case. The JavaScript language subscribes to camel case. Camel case is a naming convention for a variable that contain multiple words. The entire first word in the variable's name is lowercase. Every subsequent word's first letter is capitalized. There are no spaces or underlines between the words. They are combined together, right? So if we take a look at first name, it's not first name. In the challenge, you will write a function that takes in a snake case argument and converts the sentence to camel case convention. All right, so let's grab our examples here. Nope, they're already over there. Cool. All right, so we're going to have one input, which is going to be a string. And we are going to return one output. So we have our examples down below. All right, so let's take a look at some pseudocode. So what do we think our first step is here once we get the input inside our function? Anyone want to take a stab at that?
So I'd probably split it at the underscore.
Okay, so take our string and split it at the underscore character. This should give us an array of words, right? And So once we have our array, what do we want to do?
You're gonna want to iterate through it to check if it's capitalized or not.
So, and it looks like with the examples that they're giving us, they're all lowercase. So let's make this, let's give ourselves some additional test cases here. Right? So let's say we have this.
So you could iterate through, and then each one, would you do like two lowercase and then do, is it title or capital? I can't remember. I think it's title that does just the first letter, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure off the top of my head either, but I'm sure we have it built in that'll help us with that. So
I
go
was
ahead.
kind of curious, is there a way to iterate, like, be able to be like for every, like as it's iterating through on the underscore, is there a way to do it to like make it to every like number or number or letter after a underscore check if it's capitalized or not, if not capitalized, and then join them all together so that the first letter of
So that is a possibility as well, right? So like but the whole thing, and so this is actually, that's a great question, Chad, because if you remember last week, and let me pull up the exact challenge here. It was remove zeros, I believe. Was it remove zeros? I think it was remove zeros. It could have been alphabet code. No, it wasn't alphabet code. It was remove zeros, right? And this, right? And so we did this. And at one point, when I initially tried to solve this, right? Like, so on our first pass, instead of splitting it into an array, I tried to loop directly through the string. And I was failing there. And I never explained why. And the reason being is strings in JavaScript are immutable. This means that you cannot modify an existing string. You can only create a new string, right? And so we cannot go through this string and say, if basically after this underscore, make sure that if whatever letter this is, turn that to the uppercase letter, right? And so we would have to basically create a brand new string where we are swapping it out. And so that's what, like when we do two lowercase or two uppercase, it's providing a new copy of that string, right? Because remember, if we do let example or let example equal hello, and I do console.log example dot two uppercase, right? And then I do console.log example, right? So when I do this, I'm getting a new copy of this string and all caps, but I am not I am not mutating this string. This string cannot be changed. It can be reassigned, and I can make a copy of it and make my copy do whatever I want it to do, but I cannot change this, right? So we can't iterate through this and then pick this letter and change it within the string. We have to basically go through, break this up, and technically, like, we could just recreate the whole string every time we run into that case, but it's easier to split it apart and to use the built-in methods that we have available in JavaScript to tackle this. Right? And so I think the way we want to go is to do the split on the underscore. And we're going to iterate through the array. And basically, if index is 0, then 2 lower. If index is greater than 0, then uppercase first letter. Let's find a built-in for that. Then we need to glue our array back together as one string and return it. Does everyone feel pretty good about this so far?
Yeah, looks good.
So if it iterates through and sees a space, it treats that as 0.
It doesn't treat it as 0. It's going to split on whatever character we give it, and I'll demonstrate that here in just a second. All right, so we'll put that there. Let's include these in here. All right.
We're also gonna have to remove the underscore, right? Because when you split it, it makes it its own character in the array, right?
I'm not sure if it will or not. If it does, then yes, we'll need to address that as well. So good looking out on that, right? So let's go ahead and do console.log input. And so we're getting our input in there. And so let's go ahead and do split. Right, and this gives us the whole thing. And if we do this, it'll give it to us on each letter or each character. And then if we do this, it looks like it takes it out of the array for us. 1 second here. Just got signed out and sign back in. Sorry, 1 sec here. All right. Okay, so I think this is good here as a first step. So let's go ahead and take this out of the console.log and let's put it into a variable. All right, and so now, oh man, my spelling is off to me. All right, so we're still getting that there. So now we need to iterate through our array of words, right? So let's go ahead and say for let I equal 0, I less than array words dot length, I plus plus. All right, and so we can say if I equals 0, array of words I equals array of words I to lowercase. So let's see if that solves our first part, right? So we won't see a change in these ones, but we would expect to see a change in these last two. Right, so that solves that part for us. And so let's see what else. All right, so okay, so it looks like there isn't an actual built-in that does it. So what we're going to be doing here is, so we're going to take a string and we're going to take the first letter of it and we're going to do just the first letter of it to the upper case and then the rest of the string. So we're going to slice starting at the one index, and they don't do anything for this one because they're assuming that everything else is the way that you want it. But we know that in our stuff here that we may have some capital letters after the first letter that may be throwing us off and that we want to clean that up. All right, so let's go ahead and outside of our function, just to keep it less confusing, let's come down here and let's say let word equal hello. All right, so let's go ahead and console.log word 0.2 uppercase. All right, so it's real quick too. Right, and now we also want to console.log word.slice starting at 1. All right, so there's that and that. But if we do something like this, all right, we're still messed up here. So let's go ahead and do to lowercase. All right, and now what we can do is take something like this and we can do string concatenation. And there we go. All right, so this I can take, get rid of this here, come up here, we'll uncomment this, and we'll say array of words I is equal to, let's do this, right? All right, so now we're going into the array, we're grabbing the word we want, then we're going into the word and we're grabbing the character at the first index position. Right, and we're going to take that and send it to uppercase. And we're going to take the rest of that word and we're going to slice it. Clean this up and see if it makes it look any prettier. Not really. All right, so there's that. And now let's go ahead and we'll just uncomment this first one. All right, so we got array of words. So let's go ahead. And so there we go. My name is Kramer, right? And how do we glue something back together from an array?
Join.
Yep, so dot join. And I think if I don't put anything in there, I don't think that'll give me, oh, yep, so that gives me commas. I don't put anything in there. So I just give it an empty string. And there we go. Right, and so let's uncomment the rest of these. Right, my name is Kramer, first name, array of names, array of names, array of names. So we got all of those weird edge cases out of there that we threw in there. And so instead of console.logging this, let's go ahead and return it. And we get our truths. Now, with this one, we've got the for loop, and I think I would use the for loop instead of the doing like a for each or a dot map on this one, just because I like the way it reads better. We're isolating we're doing something different every time to the first word, right? Like that's going all lowercase no matter what. And so I would probably stick with this versus trying to get clever and add more built-ins here. So like I like this as an answer. Just trying to see if there's anything else I could clean up in here. Right, and even over doing like, I mean, I could technically do this as a ternary, but because these are so long, I think it would get even messier. I like having my if, having my brackets, keeping everything organized this way instead of just having a bunch of run-on text that gets smushed to the right. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with this one. Any questions about this one, what I did here?
You probably explained it, but the slice one, what is the one for? I didn't catch that part.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I didn't cover it really today because I just kind of pulled this out of here. But if we do mdn.slice, string prototype.slice. So slice method extracts a section of string and returns it as a new string without modifying the original string. Right, and so the first parameter, so if there's only one, right, so for us we did slice one, right, so if I take slice one and put slice one here, and let me just comment the rest of these out, if it lets me, and it doesn't. How about just deleting them? It does look right. So notice how I'm starting, so again, remember with a string, they have indexes just like, right? Right, and it's hard because like once you get into multiple digits, but you get the point, right? So like there's 10, like now I'm in the 20s, 30s, so on, right? So but a string has an index just like an array does. So when I put in slice 1, I'm telling it to start at the first index position and return everything after that index position. So if I do a slice 2, instead of getting he, it's going to be E space quick brown dot, right? And same thing, 3, right? 4, and I'm just chopping off. So I'm starting at the 4th index and going forward from there. And then there's an index end. So if you see 2 numbers in here, right? So if I only want the word quick, right, I can start at 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I believe if I put in 8, it'll cut off the K, right? Because the end parameter is not inclusive, it's exclusive. And so if I do 4 through 9, it starts at the 4th and starts returning everything after the 4th. But then with that second parameter, it stops at the 9th index, which is actually right here, but it's non-inclusive. What's up, dude? Sorry, getting cat bombed. Yeah, I know. JavaScript is fun. So right, so I mean, this is basically like slicing with a string. And so I could do, if I do, I don't know how high this goes, but like if I do 50, right? So it's probably less than 50. So let's adjust here. Let's do 40, right? And so 40 gets me to here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So if I just do 4 to 44, it'll probably cut off the period. Nope, it gives it to me. And so now I can also, because the same thing here, if I do something like this, right? So now I've pushed dog off by making it, making my string longer. But let's say I always want like everything except for the final punctuation mark, then I can do something like this where I start counting from the back, right? So if I do this, now I've got the punctuation mark. And if I delete red out of here, I'm still getting everything except for the punctuation. All right, if I want to get rid of dog as a whole, yeah, hi buddy. I know. So sorry, say hello to baby. Yeah, meow meow. He belongs to a couple of homeless guys that live in my neighborhood, and they were evicted from their campsite and have to move to a different campsite. So I'm watching them while they figure out a new place that they want to camp at. And so he spends most of his life living in like a 10 or 12 person tent with 2 brothers, and so he doesn't really know the meaning of personal space. So all day long at work, he's been rolling up on me and just like smashing his face into my face while I'm trying to talk to people, because he thinks if anyone's talking, they're definitely talking to him. All right, so does this help with what slice does and why we had a 1 there?
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you.
No problem. And and also, like, to be fair with that, like, let's say if camel case was like the first 2 letters of the, like, each word had to be uppercase, right? Then we could change the slice to 2, and we can make a modification here so that we're doing not just like the 0 index, but we could do a slice here as well, right? So I could say I'd slice and say 0 and stop at 2, which will give me the 0 and 1 index, and send those to uppercase. And then on this, start at 2, which means I'm starting at the 3rd index position. And let's go ahead and console log array words join. But so this will fail now. But see, now I'm taking the first 2 letters of every subsequent word and I'm upcasing them. Right. So that just allows me to control where I'm at. And so I did just did the zero index, I could use a slice for both of these as well. Right.
So just to be clear, since this is control flow, does it really? I assume it does. Does it matter where you put your slices first and your uppercases last and all that, or built-ins?
How so?
Like, say I were to put dot slice on your line 20, like at, or I guess, let's change that to uppercase at the end, like after two lowercase. Would that change anything, or would it?
Well, it would, because what, like, if I take this, right, and I put this on the end, what we're doing is we're then also taking the first letter of the word, and now we're gluing it to the end. Right. So
Gotcha.
like I get so now we're doing like Pig Latin, right? And because like the first word doesn't get affected, but every word after that, we're like, this order matters, right? Because we're concatenating a string. So it's the difference between doing like n plus aim or aim plus n, right? Like those will concatenate just as you see them to name and that and amen.
Gotcha. Okay.
All right.
I
So
appreciate that.
the order in which you're performing the math here, because like if those were numbers, right, it doesn't matter if this was 3 plus 4 or 4 plus 3, right? We still get 7 either way, but because we're gluing pieces of a string together, it does make a difference what order you glue them in.
So you kind of have to do like a coding PEMDAS kind of thing.
Well, I I wouldn't go that far. I think maybe you're overcomplicating it a little bit. Think of it like the word magnets that you put on the refrigerator. Like you have to assemble words in a specific order to make them mean something, right? And so if we did not do the concatenation, because we're using plus, but that's just to make the strings concatenate. Remember, I could do this as well. Oops. Right, and maybe like taking the plus sign out of there will remove some of the confusion, but this should pass as well, right? But letters read in the order that you add them to a sentence.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. I get it now.
Yeah, dude. I know. All right. So let's see here. So that is well, does anyone have any more questions about this one? All right. So let's go ahead and look at the next challenge here. Right. So we just did camel case. What is presidential info? In order to be elected president of the United States, you need to meet certain qualifications, such as being at least 35 years old and being a natural born citizen in the US. Write a method that takes in the last name, the age, and country of origin for a presidential candidate in that order and returns a Boolean true if that candidate has potential to be president, or false if they do. Okay, so this is just checking multiple factors to see how you get. So there's this one, and what's after that one? Okay, so that's high score. Okay, so yeah, let's do the presidential info one here. We'll start off with that one. So we've got a function eligible for pres, right? And we have our two examples here, right? So we can copy those over, and we're going to split up into groups for this one. So let me drop the link here. And then also give me just a second here, and I'm going to take this, put this here. All right, and I'll drop this in here too, so everyone can have can grab a clean copy of that. And all right, so I'm going to drop us into groups of 3-ish. And then it's 7:03. And what I'd say is feel free to take like a 5-minute break or so, and then decide how you're going to work on it as a team. And then I'll be pulling everyone back in at 7:30 to go over this, unless I get a message from every group ahead of time saying that they've solved it. The one thing I'll also say with this is that pull this back up, right? We're doing some checking here. So this could be a opportunity to there's going to be multiple ways to solve this. And there's also an opportunity possibly to look at solving this with a higher order function. And that's probably how I'll demonstrate my solution to this. So let me go ahead and open up the breakout rooms, and let me pause the recording. All right, well, welcome back from the breakout rooms. We split up to work on the presidential info challenge. And so I misspoke a little bit before I sent everyone off, saying like, oh, hey, like I could save this or solve this as like a higher order function. It wouldn't necessarily be a higher order function, but what I would look at ultimately doing is probably consuming this with or organizing things into different functions, but I would not pass them in as parameters. I would just create them as helper functions. So this, I would not solve this as a higher order function. So let's go over here and grab this. All right, so with this, we have 3 parameters. All right, they're all going, well, actually, they're not all strings. I believe we get 2 strings and a number. Let's do this. So what's the interesting twist with name?
Or
It's
the
irrelevant.
Yeah, it was irrelevant. We don't need it.
That's what I'm saying. You don't need it at all.
All right, and we're going to return a Boolean. And So example, let's go ahead and pull our examples over.
Well, interviews try to like trick you like that, where they'll give you kind of like the old school, like when you're in school, give you something that's irrelevant and then make you overthink it and then try to like make you parse the relevant stuff.
You know, I mean, it's not uncommon to run into like in the real world, like I said, I mean, so I I write software for the Department of Defense. I write HR software. So I work on software that basically tracks everyone that wants to join the military, regardless of branch. So anyone that's a vet has been processed through a MEPS. I'm a contractor for MEPCOM, so MEPS Command, out of North Chicago, and we track at a minimum about 140 points of data against a single applicant, right? So ASVAB scores, the individual scores that make up the ASVAB, all of your health stuff, any of your health paperwork, next of kin, all of that stuff. And so I have all of that at my fingertips. And when I'm writing a new piece of code and I need to display some of that information, I need to be able to determine what information I do need and what information I don't need. So I wouldn't say that it would be unheard of, like say to like if you were doing like a interview challenge or something like that, where they throw in some unnecessary information that is there only to trip you up, and basically you need to identify it so that you don't basically go down the wrong path. So yeah, and I haven't experienced that in an interview, but I wouldn't rule something like that out in a challenge.
Gotcha.
All right, so we're going to, first step is we're going to ignore name, don't need it, right? And then we want to make sure that their age is greater than
35. It's gotta be greater or equal to 35.
greater equal, be at least 35 years old. Yep, and they must be from the United States. So greater than or equal to 35. Okay, so probably the most straightforward way to solve this is just a double check, right? To make sure that age is greater than 35, or like in the same if statement, right? So we could say something like if your age is greater than or equal to 35 and country is equal to United States, return true. No, sorry, 1 second.
I'm just thinking like for a catch-all for the United States, shouldn't we do like change country to your country equals like country dot lower or upper, whichever one you wanna.
Um, we could, but like, I mean, it's not specified in the challenge, right? So we could always say that, like, I mean, we could format all of this, like we could build in a check to make sure that age is actually a number and not a string. So this would be like the most basic iteration of this. Right, so there's our true. Right, and so this is great, and right, we could do things where, all right, we say,
Well, isn't that second one supposed to be false?
yes, I'm sorry, well, it is supposed to be false, but because
Oh, you put the equals the false, okay.
right, so it's still getting a true. Sorry, that's probably a little confusing. Right, and so like, but if we do something like this, we get a false, right? So we could standardize this, so we could say United States and then say country equals country dot to lower case, right? And then so now every country that comes in, we're just going to send the whole thing to lowercase, and then we're always going to compare it against lowercase. Right, and now we're back to trues there. And this is pretty simple. And so I think, like, if I were to make this a little bit more simple, right, I could do something like this. So I could get rid of my you know, we could do something like this. So we could say return this.
Yeah, our group
That's
just
what
did it
we're-
in one whole return line.
Yep. And because we have the logic in here, we're forcing it to resolve itself to true or false. All right, so we still get all of our trues there. And so that cleans that up. And again, the same thing, like even like something along these lines. So I could move this down to here. All right, so now we're still getting all of our trues. And so this is pretty much one line. So this is about as terse as this would get. If I like, let's say that, and again, this is very simple and this is very simple, but let's say that this information, we have to grab it from a Wikipedia page, right? And so we get the whole blurb of that person's life story, and we need to determine if they're eligible for president. So it's not just like being nice and we get the age and the name. We would have to parse through data to isolate that information and find out automatically. And so with that, what I would look at is something where we actually write helper functions. And so instead of just going for something like this, right, I could write something like age check, right, age, and then write a function for age check, age. Right, and same thing for this. Oops. Right, and so this should still give me my truths, right? Because what it's doing is actually just passing this information, and this is a higher order function at this point because I am returning two functions. And so, which again, it doesn't necessarily make sense for something this small. But like I said, if we had something like this many lines of code to parse through for this one, and then something similar for this one down here, now instead of having, excuse me, one giant function, right, that actually does two different things, where it's responsible for locating the age and checking it, and this one is basically parsing through information and finding the country and checking it. Instead of having one function that does both of those things, we want to have single responsibility and move each responsibility into its own separate function. And yes,
How is it?
Wouldn't the two functions need to be above the?
Yeah, that's what I was about to ask. How's it reading it when the functions are below the what it's checked?
so that's
That's
how
what we
we're doing
do.
it. Right. And
It does that automatically.
yep,
That's interesting.
right. And I didn't like, and honestly, I'm going to redo this slide. I did not create it. And I've just been kind of muddling through it, but I think for the next class through, I am going to update the hoisting with some better examples. But I'm going to drop in the notes for tonight the MDN link to hoisting, which goes, it did a much better job of explaining it, and even talks about like how you can hoist with var, but what happens with let and const and why it's different. And again, it even talks about class hoisting, which again, we're not dealing with classes quite yet. But this does a better job of explaining what's going on. But yes, it is hoisting. So everything is basically getting shoved to the top as far as the functions are concerned, and that's why it can see them.
Would that still work if you did the new ES6 fat arrow function too?
I'm not sure, but I'm happy to try. So let's do const, oops, age check equals age. It does. Right, and same thing here, if I do this. And I believe why the reason it's happening is because, again, the computer reads this, and then it reads this, and then it reads this. So as long as these are above this, because I think maybe if I move a function down here, but we'll see if it doesn't. Right, so now we get the reference error. Right, and it's because the function is still above, even though it's below where we wrote the function, it's still above where we're actually calling the function. Right, and now this would be a good question. I don't know if I will get the same thing if I do this. All right, so yeah, so we do run into that same issue with const when we use the new syntax with this. It causes the reference error, but with this, using the old function style, it doesn't cause an issue. And again, this is not better. This is better. Like, this is forcing you to be more consistent with how you write and place your code. So you want guardrails on, like, you want things yelling at you when you're not consistent with your placement. So even though we look at it and say like, oh, well, this is worse because like if I move it around, I get a reference error or whatever. You want that reference error. You want your software, your tools helping enforce stricter convention. All right. And so again, like I said, unnecessary for something this small, but something that I would like, if I had to do multiple things and there was much more manipulation with it, this is a higher order function. This is, I was misspoke twice. So I originally said it was a higher order function, and I said it wasn't going to be a higher order function because I wasn't thinking about placing them directly on the return line. I was thinking about assigning them as variables. But just doing this directly on the return line, this is absolutely a higher order function. These are the two functions that it's returning. Any other questions about the presidential info and the different ways that I solved it? Anything in the chat? All right. So let's go ahead and move on to high score. And I'll go ahead and run the class through this one. And then we'll look at, I don't know, last four social isn't going to be too hard. What else do we have out there? Ooh, this one's a tough one. So actually, let's do high score in groups again. So I'm going to split everyone up, and I'm going to give everyone until about 8:20. Or well, I'll say 8:15, unless I get messages from everyone beforehand. And then when we come back, I will do 2 strikes in front of the class, because this one seems pretty simple in the beginning, but it ends up being it gets like there's edge cases in here that make it pretty messy. So let's go ahead and do high score. And if you finish high score early, I would say just jump into last four of social. This one isn't too terrible either. And I mean, it's telling you pretty much what you'll need to solve it right there. It's just putting them in the right order. So let's go ahead and drop this. All right, so those are in there. I'm going to stop recording. All right, so welcome back from the breakout rooms. We're going to take a look at high score and last four real quick, and then hopefully, and we'll move through these fairly quickly, and then hopefully we should have enough time for me to take a look at 2 strikes in front of the class. If not, that's what we'll start Monday off with, just depending on questions. And don't hold back on any questions or anything like that. Like, I mean, we have 3 more days next week to keep going with this, so we've got plenty of time. All right, so for high score, we're going to have 1 parameter. It's going to be an array of numbers. We are going to return 1 number, which is going to be the highest number from the array. We've got a couple of examples here already. And for pseudocode, we're going to create a variable that will hold the highest test score. We're then going to iterate through our array. We're going to compare the current element against the high score. And we're going to use control flow to replace the high score with the current score if it is higher. If not, we just want to leave it alone. And then once we're done, we're going to return the high score variable. So let's go ahead and create our variable. So we'll say let high score, and we're just going to make it equal to 0. It looks like all of our tests are going to be positive numbers here. And then we're also going to return high score. All right, so if I run this, I should just get 0, 0 up here. And so let's go ahead and dig in to our array. Now I know we're going to need to iterate through the entire array. So I was also going to go back here, all the way back to day 1, and I write a lot of for loops. Let's go ahead and iteration. There we go. So let's go ahead and write a for, right? So we can say let number of, and then the name of our array, right? So back here to high score, and we can say let number of student scores, or actually, and so we'll just call this score. That sounds better. And let me see here, and I'm pretty sure I just screwed that syntax up. So 4, all right. Back to here. So this should be 4, and this should be let score of student scores. And let's go ahead and just do console.log score. All right, so 89, 76, 56, 89, 76, 56. So that looks good to me. I'm getting what I think I want. And so now what I want to do is say, let's see here. We'll do this as a ternary. We'll say score greater than high score. Then we'll say high score is now equal to score. All right. If not, we'll just say high score. All right. And so let's go ahead and then console.log high score. All right. So now we're console.logging high score, right? So we hit 89. That becomes the high score. So then it's 76, it stays the high score. It's 56, 89 stays the high score. We hit 92, 92 stays the high score, 92 stays the high score, and then we return high score down, right? And the same thing for 97. If I took 100 here, right, we see the same progression, except now we hit 100 at the end. Right, so to me, this looks good. I don't need to console.log each one of these. All right, so there's my 92 and my 97. And so kind of a lesson with this is there are lots of built-ins, and usually before I show you like a way to solve it with a built-in, and I don't think there's a built-in. I mean, we could probably filter or do something like that. That would be really flashy. But if you're not quite sure how the built-in works, and it's okay, like it's better to write it in a for loop and understand how for loops work, right? Before just jumping into a dot map or a dot for each. Like understanding well how for loops work, when you use a while loop versus a for loop, all of those things. And also just like as kind of like a general thought process, like especially for interviewing, if you are interviewing and let's say they ask you to solve a challenge or like whiteboard. One, if you're whiteboarding, like you can't just write like math.max on the whiteboard. They're going to ask you to write out the steps of how you'd get to that. But it's the same thing with a coding challenge. Like they may tell you right off the bat, like, I want you to solve how to reverse a string without using any built-ins, right? Or give me the highest number out of an array or a matrix of nested arrays without without using any built-in, so that you have to use for loops or nested for loops, or they may let you solve it the best way that you can solve it. And then if it's an hour interview and you solve it in 15 minutes with built-ins, they're probably going to come back to you and be like, okay, like this built-in right here, can you remove that and solve this problem without using a built-in, right? Like they're going to continue to like escalate it so that it's going to keep getting harder and harder to fill up the time, right? And so don't necessarily feel like every problem you have to solve, like you have to solve it with a built-in. Like you can leverage if statements, like just because I use the ternary here because the syntax is tertiary, right? Like I can say if, oops. So if score is greater than high score, right? This is doing the exact same thing here, right? And so I can run this. Whoops. Spelling. Thank you. Not high sure, high score. All right, so I still get my 92, 97. So if when I write a ternary, you're still like, what the hell is that? Feel free to write it as an if statement, right? Or like get good at writing if statements before you try and write like ternaries. So like if you're not comfortable doing this, being uncomfortable at two things isn't better than being comfortable at one thing, right? And so all things to think about. Are there any questions in the way that I solved this problem?
I half get it. So you let for in the beginning of the for loop or the loop on line 16, you let score like determine its own, I guess, be its own variable, but then reference it to the like student scores. So it would return.
So let me write this in a standard for loop as well. So I can say for let I equal 0, I less than student scores dot length I plus plus, and I can say if student scores I is
Length is misspelled, by the way.
okay. I'll swing back and get that 1 sec. It's greater than high score. Then high score is equal to student scores I. Right, and so this does the same thing as this. Right, I was just using a for of loop instead of just a standard for loop because I was using it for an array, but this will do the same thing. Do high score index JS29 because I didn't comment that out. All right, so there's my 92 and 97 still. And past that, let's go ahead and go to Python tutor, and let's run this through Python tutor here.
Did we just go back to the 80s?
Yep. They would have killed for a tool like this in the 80s. All right. So, and again, this is visualizing what the computer is doing behind the scenes, right? So like I talk us through this, but there's 48 steps to get to our correct answer, right? Like 48 different operations that we're going to do. And that's to do both of them. So let me actually just back up here once real quick. And let's just get rid of this one for right now. Now let me get rid of this as well. Let's make this clean. All right, so now I should get about 24 steps, right? So my function gets loaded into memory, right? So computer comes in, reads this and says, okay, there's a function here called high score. What's the next step? It goes all the way down to here and it says console.log high score in here. I'm going to pop this out of the console. I'm going to trim away all the stuff we don't. All right, so this gets read into memory. We come down here. The computer hasn't taken any action yet until it gets this call to action, which is a function call. And so we call high score. High score gets called. Student scores gets passed in the parameter, and it's an array with 89, 76, 56, 92, and 66. It sees high score. It's still undefined. Take my next step. High score has now been assigned a value of 0, right? We come into our for loop, right? And we read all of this in. And we say, if student scores I is greater than high score, then do this, right? And so student score, or the I is 89. That's going to be higher than 0. So we're going to come in here, right? So now we're going to read that line, and now we're going to assign high score the value of 89, right? So there we go. And now we're back in our for loop, and we're going to come through. I is equal to 1 now, so we're going to look at 76, right? And then we come down to this line, all right? So we see block 2, right? So we've got that 1 there, so that's I, right? And is 76 greater than 89? No, it's not. So we're going to skip. We're not going to do anything. That's the end of my if statement, and my for loop goes back up for another pass. Right? Same thing. Now I is going to be 2. I is 2. Student scores I is 56. Is 56 greater than 89? No, it's not. So we do not go into the if statement. We try again. So I is now going to be 3. Student scores box 3 is 92. So we're going to come down here. We're going to evaluate. That is true this time. So now we're going to come down here and we're going to assign high score a value of 92. So now high score is value of 92. We're going to go through our loop one last time. 66 is not greater than 92. Right? So nothing happens. Nothing happens. This is no longer true. Right? So I is now 5. And we still, I'm sorry, I would be 6. I would be 5, and it's going to be, it's no longer less than the length of this because the length is 5. They're equal. So we end our for loop. We don't come in here at all. And we pop down to this line, and we're going to return high score. Right. So now we evaluate. I was 5. That's not true. Come down to here, and we're going to return high score. Return value is 92, which is the answer that we're looking for. Right. But like I said, whenever you write some code and you're like, even if you get the right answer, if you're not sure how you got the right answer, it definitely pays to come over here and plunk it in and watch the computer walk through the steps of how it calculates it. Did that help kind of illustrate what was going on, Anton?
Yeah, but I just have to study up more on for loops in general, just so I can do it without thinking too hard about it, and yeah. And because I honestly kind of shy away from it because I know so little about it.
Yeah, and pretty much every challenge in this class from this point forward is most likely going to require some sort of iteration, like some sort of loop in it. So you will get lots of practice with it, but like I said, looping is definitely a core component of writing software. All right. So any other questions about how I went about solving high score.
Hey, Charles, kind of unrelated but related to this particular problem. So in the console log high score, I threw in like 102. And it came back with 92. Like it wasn't reading like the 3 digits. Well, maybe my code's wrong.
Do you want to Slack me the code and we can take a look at it?
No.
Probably. Yeah, it shouldn't matter the length of the number if you're doing it. Even if you don't want me to show it in front of class, feel free to Slack me the code and I can take a look at it and send you a DM back about it. So that way you understand what's going on with that. Let's see here. All right. So any other questions about high score before I move on to last four social?
No, but I just found a really good website that I love now.
Sorry, what's that?
I said no, but I really do like that website now. Bookmark that one.
The Python tutor? Yeah, that one
Yeah.
definitely helped me survive the first month of code Platoon. Eventually you'll start writing things that don't fit into it anymore, but it's a lifesaver in the beginning. All right, so last four of social. All right, we've got write a function that takes in a number that represents a social security number and then return the last 4 digits as a string of the social security number. All right, so we get a number 546800156, and we should just be returning a string of 0156. We've got lots of stuff here. I don't know that we'll need all of this, but it sends us in the right direction. Right, so, and maybe when I see that, maybe I'm not thinking about it right, but when I'm looking at this from a pseudocode point of view, I'm going to take our number and convert it to a string, and then I'm going to slice off the last 4 characters of that string and return them, because I don't have to convert them back to a number or anything like that. I'm hoping this shouldn't be that difficult of a process. So let's go ahead and see what happens here. So let's go ahead and do console.log social security. All right, let's go ahead and run this. Right, there's my numbers. And how do we get these to change over to a string? And there should be a built-in method for this, right? So convert number to string JS. Okay, number to string method. Oh, where is my MD? All right, so we take a look in here. To string method returns a string representing the specified number object. All right, so let's see here. To string, we've got a parameter radix, an integer in the range 2 through 36, specifying the base to use for representing numeric values. I don't think we need to get into that. So let's go ahead and take a look here at last 4. So let's say social security to string. And we won't put anything in. And it looks like we've got our string values here. Right. And now if we're going to start counting, and because it's social security numbers, it's always going to be 9 digits. I don't have to do anything crazy. Like if it was variable lengths or telephone numbers with country codes on it, it would get more difficult because we'd have varied lengths. Is it your turn to come bug me? Come on. Got a Mo will be the next cat that'll be joining us here shortly. I'm just going to start counting at an index and slice off all of the characters after that. All right, so I can say 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right, so I want to start at the 5th index. So if I say dot slice 5, 0, 1, 5, 6, 8, 3, 5, 7, 0, 7, 6, 9. Right, and so that is all I have to do for this one. And I can take this out of my console.log statement and turn this into a return. All right, and there's my numbers. All right, so any questions on what I did here?
No, that one actually seemed very, very easy.
Good.
Well, the only notable thing I think you did is that you use console log in the beginning to visualize what you're doing, and then use the return to finalize it, and then
Yeah, and I mean, that's just like debugging as a JavaScript developer. And because like I wouldn't have had to have used the console.log if these were already wrapped and like, so it's just order operations. But yes, I mean, you can return, but also if, let's say that, so this is, so there's two different software projects that you will work on. One is called Greenfield, where you're writing code from scratch, and the other is everything else, like maintenance, refactoring code, so changing existing code. So it's easy for me to return and just keep hitting the return button to see what I'm getting. But if there was a situation where I came into something like this, right, and this is existing code that someone else wrote 2 years ago, and someone said, hey, Charles, we need to change this around a little bit, and we wanted to do something different. Well, maybe I don't want to start deleting this off the return line. And what I'm going to do instead is start adding console.log statements and using that to print things out before that maybe is not my final return, right? And so you can do it either way, and both ways will have advantages depending on like what's going on in the situation here. So, but yes, so this is, again, we use two built-ins to accomplish this. I could make it more difficult. I could say solve this without using slice, right? And then if I were to solve it without using slice, like I would have to, and that's where they say like split and join, right? So I could do something like this. So this is the quick way to do it. So I could also do let r of so equal dot split. All right, and so console.log r of soch. Oops, what did I do? So split is because I did not push it to a string first, and you cannot split a number. All right. So there we go. And now we've got our string of this. And so we could then say for let I equal, won't be 0. I think we'll start at 5. I less than r of soch dot length, I plus plus, oops, plus plus, whole plus plus. Right, and so now let's move this up into here, and let's do r of soch I. Oops, r of soch I.
Length is misspelled.
There we go. Thank you. So there's our last 4 there as well, right? And so now we could do something, where we could say, let last for, right, and then, let's see, I'm not sure if this will work or not. Last for plus equals this. I don't know if I can string concatenate this way or not, or if this is going to force it back into a number. This may force it back into a number. So you get undefined, because it's got that value of undefined in there. So how would I get around giving that getting rid of that undefined? So I think it would be something like this. So let's assign it a value of a, just to get it out of the way, and we'll say if last for is triple equal to a, then we will do, this needs to be last for, not just last. We can say last for is equal to r of so I. And so now we're just reassigning it, and then else we're concatenating it. So this might give us a better answer. So there's our answer there. And then we can return last for instead of doing that, and we get the answer, right? So you can see there's a lot more that goes into it when you can't use a built-in. Right, that was actually a really good example. And there's some things I could do to clean this up, like maybe use a ternary, things along those lines, clean up my for loop a little bit. But you can see, like, the using slice replaces all of this for us, right? So slice is basically like a for loop iterating through a string for you and starting to count at a specific index, and then returning it after that, and then adding it to a variable and storing it, right? And I could also not assign a here. I could say, without making it extra weird, I could say undefined here, and this should work as well. So that gives me the answer as well without having to assign it to a weird variable. All right, so hopefully that illustrates like the difference between using a built-in and having to kind of grok it from ground zero. Are there any questions on how I solve this either way?
I think it's pretty obvious, but I'm just making sure. The 5 in the for loop is how much you want to splice, pretty much, right? Or slice, my bad.
Correct. So instead of starting from zero, like more, because if I change this to 0, I'll get the whole social security number. Right. And so I'm starting from the 5th index position. And same thing, like we could even do this, like, let's say that we only wanted the middle 2 numbers, right? So I could say, or I guess I should say middle 3 numbers, right? So I could start counting here So I'm at 5 and I start at 0. So I could start at 3. And then I could do length minus 2, or probably minus 3. Right, and so now I'm only getting the middle 3 numbers, right? So this is just controlling where I start counting, and this is controlling where I'm stop counting. And so this is like something like this is equivalent. So I'm going to change this back. So let me do this. This here. And so this would be 6 or 7. Right. So that's the equivalent of slice 3, 7. Right. And if I change this back to this, right? So you basically slice is taking a loop. So it's called abstraction. I kind of talked about like the term auto magically, right? So slice auto magically runs a loop and sets the index that you start counting at. You can alternately, or you can optionally set the index that you stop counting at, and builds out a copy of a string that's basically been processed the exact same way as this. And it just does it in a single command. And if you dug into the guts of JavaScript, you'd find something very similar to this in there. Like, because there is code behind slice, like in the root code of Node, like there is something behind, like when you tell it slice, like it's still a function right here or a built-in method. It still has operable code somewhere inside JavaScript.
Gotcha.
All right, so it is 9 o'clock. We didn't quite make it to the what you gonna call it, the 2 strikes. So I'll lead off with that on Monday, which is fine. Monday, what do we got on Monday? So truthy falsy, and also recursion. And then session 8 is going to be talking about code platoon. And then session 9 is basically like a kind of a wrap-up session. There isn't anything slide-wise. Like if anyone has any, we'll talk about it on next Wednesday. If there's anything specific people want to talk about on Thursday, if you've got an outside challenge that you've been struggling with and you want me to take a look at it, any questions you have about what it's like to be a software developer, what it's like to go through code platoon, I'm happy to answer all of that stuff. But as for now, I'm going to stop the recording.